Subscribe and click the notification bell, and I'll give you a degree certifying you in being scared. Congratulations. College students already have so much on their plates. Studies, grades, debt, and sometimes even a job on the side. Being a college student sucks sometimes. However, the following allegedly true and disturbing confessions from college students will show you that attending university can also be horrifying, whether the horror happens on or off campus. If you want to hear your story in a future episode of Darkness Prevails, share your story with us at darknessprevails.org/submit. I'll be publishing creepy confessions from first responders in a few days, so if you've got a story on that topic, send it in soon. Also, my podcast is now monetized, so you can catch up on all my previous episodes, download hours of free shows, and even lock your devices while you listen, all for free, just by listening at anchor.fm/darknessprevails. Thank you. I was followed home. From Greta. Location: the southern United States. I was 20 years old when this happened. I'm a 5'3" girl, and I was attending university. In that area, it's almost always nice outside, so I enjoyed walking to and from my dorms when I could, especially with my girlfriend. The two of us lived in the same building, so we walked to the dorms after class every day. We had the same major. One day my girlfriend's brother was in town, and she was going to lunch with him that day. She asked me if I wanted to come with them, but I said no because I had an essay due in less than a week, and I wanted to work on it. Now, this path we usually walked was a dark and narrow path and surrounded by thick woods. It was about 2.5 miles long. It's not the safest way to go, but it is the fastest, and albeit the most scenic. Where the university is located is a fairly safe area, so we felt safe enough walking together. However, this path isn't on the college map, so not too many people walk through it. So that evening, I said goodbye to my girlfriend and her brother. Then I began to walk down the path. Everything was going normally. I was listening to Britney Spears on my speaker as I walked. I walked about halfway down the path and had only passed 1 or 2 other people, so it was rather peaceful and nice. I wasn't worried at all because, as I said earlier, even though it's out of the way, there aren't that many people on the path. So you can imagine my surprise when I suddenly hear a loud rustling sound to the left of me. This scared me because I'm a paranoid person already. To ease my fear, I FaceTimed my girlfriend. She saw the look on my face immediately and asked what was wrong. I said that I simply missed her, but she could hear the shakiness in my voice. She reassured me by saying that they were nearly finished eating and that they would take her brother's car and meet me at the end of the path. This brought some foreclosure, and I asked if I could stay on FaceTime with her. She said okay, and I kept on walking. I had been walking for another 5 minutes when I heard more rustling, only this time it lasted longer. My girlfriend was still on FaceTime with me, so she asked me about my sudden reaction to the noise, and I told her what I'd been hearing. Then I began to walk a little bit faster. Once again, there was more rustling, and now I was beginning to hear human footsteps. This thought was confirmed when my girlfriend's brother suddenly asked in an alarmed voice who else was on the path with me. I spun around, and there on the path I saw a dark figure. They were standing about 30 feet away from me. I gasped. My girlfriend reacted, asking me if everything was okay. I could barely get the words out when the person began to run at me at full sprint. I screamed and I began to run away as fast as I could. Luckily, I had been a runner in high school, so I was pretty fast. But this guy, he was faster. We ran down the path, my backpack slowing me down, so I let go of it, dropping it on the ground and hoping that the guy would take that and just stop chasing me. But it didn't work. It wasn't the backpack that he wanted. He kept on running toward me, but now I didn't have all the weight on me as before, and I hoped I could outrun him now. From the FaceTime on my phone, I could hear my girlfriend panicking, asking me what in the world was going on, but I could not answer. All the while, her brother was on the phone yelling at the police and trying to tell me that they would be here soon. I didn't look back at the man again yet, but I could hear him running behind me. Pretty soon, I could see the end of the path, and my girlfriend's brother's car was there waiting. My girlfriend was practically hanging out of the open door in the back seat. She was beckoning me. I ran faster and jumped into the car. My girlfriend slapped the door, screaming to her brother to take off, and he did. The police pulled us over once we got on the highway. The officer noticed that we all had panicked looks on our faces. He asked if we were okay. My girlfriend's brother explained how I had been chased by someone, and she remembered hearing about it on the radio. We were escorted to the police station, and there we were interviewed. Based on my description, the police looked for the guy, and they found someone lurking in the woods. And this is when things get worse. Turns out this guy had a lot more to confess to than simply running at me on that path. He straight up admitted that he had been following my girlfriend and I for a while now. He would follow us on that dark path, waiting for the right moment, always taking pictures on his camera, pictures of us that he kept in his pockets by the dozen. And when he saw that one of us was alone one day, he said he couldn't risk passing up the moment, said it was the opportunity of a lifetime. Well, my girlfriend and I are still together. We live together in a bigger town. We've been here for 4 years now, and we're planning on having dinner with her brother tonight. I thank both of them, my girlfriend and her brother, and I thank the police force, because without the combination of all of them, I'm not sure if I'd still be here today, or at least in one sane piece. Alone at my grandparents' house. From Scott 30303003. Location, Ohio. This happened to me 4 years ago while I was still in college. I went to a mid-sized public university in Ohio, and I lived in the dorms for the first 3 years that I attended. My parents lived about 3 hours away in Cleveland, and due to the money and scheduling issues, I only went to visit them about 3 times a year. After my freshman year, I got a job as a lab aide for the main university computer lab. It was an easy job with okay pay at the time, $8 an hour, but required me to be available to work during the summer too. Summer was slow at the lab, and I would usually only work 2 or 3 days a week, so living in the dorm did not make much economic sense. Luckily, my parents only lived 30 minutes away from campus in a rural area with 10 to 20 acre lots, and they humbly offered to let me stay with them for free. The neighborhood they lived in was good too, not fancy. Their house was 1 story with a finished basement where my room was. It was a few hundred feet off the road and was only partially visible due to the landscape. This was normal for the neighborhood, and we couldn't see any neighboring houses through the trees. I should note that my grandparents also had an RV and would be gone for weeks at a time. They were both retired, but they liked having someone around to watch the house. This story takes place on a night when my grandparents were gone. Despite the relative isolation, I never really felt creeped out in the house. It was well lit and maintained, and the neighbors generally looked out for each other. One night I was on the first floor in the kitchen, when I saw headlights creeping slowly down the street. It was odd, but I didn't immediately freak out, as it was difficult to find houses here, and I simply assumed they were lost. Again, because there wasn't a totally clear view of the street, the truck soon disappeared behind the trees, and I forgot about it pretty quickly. I turned off the light and went back down to my room in the basement. I was playing GTA and messaging some friends on Facebook. The basement room had these sort of half windows that were probably a foot high, and I left them cracked open in the evening for ventilation. I was taken off guard when I began to hear the crunching of leaves and gravel coming from the cracked window. Now, because I felt generally safe here, my first thought was this was one of my neighbors coming to ask for something. I started getting worried when they began to walk around the house, and I could hear them going through bushes. Our house had perimeter floodlights that we usually kept off. I crept upstairs toward the switch in the laundry room. I flipped on the switch, then I looked out the window, only to see one of the most messed up looking guys I'd ever seen. He looked diseased, rabid. He began to speed walk back toward the street, while glancing back at the house with a menacing yet angry look on his face. I don't think he saw me, though. I immediately called my grandpa, and he told me to call the cops, which I did. An officer showed up about half an hour later and took my report, but there wasn't a lot he could do, as I didn't really have a lot of information on the guy. He scanned the premises with his spotlight after he left, but didn't find anything. At this point, I was still on edge, but I figured it was probably a would-be thief that got scared off. Now, the way I parked my car out there, it wasn't visible from the street, so I think they assumed that no one was home here. After that incident, I had basically told myself that I wasn't going to bed that night. So I continued playing video games and messaging friends, telling them about the weird guy. One of them offered to let me crash at his place in town, but I really thought the scary events of the night were over. I was wrong. Probably about 2 hours later, as I was starting to get drowsy, but was too afraid to go to sleep, I went to smoke a cigar on the porch, and to make sure some freak hadn't stolen anything. I stepped out onto the porch and lit my cigar. As I began to puff, I heard a faint noise. At first, I thought it was a distant air conditioner, but as I listened more intently, I could hear a sound like a car. A little unnerved, I walked around the side of the house, and I could faintly see the dome light of a truck at the end of the road down the street, and I saw 2 guys sitting in the cab. I couldn't tell if it was the same truck as before, or if the guy that had been at my house was there, but it didn't sit right with me. I go back to the house and turn on practically all the lights, inside and out. Then I got my phone ready to dial the cops. As I'm walking around the house trying to figure out what to do next, I hear the truck slowly creeping up the gravel driveway, no headlights on. I decide at this point to call the cops again. This is a small town after all, so the dispatcher remembered me, having called earlier, and said the same officer should be able to get there in about 10 minutes. I'm panicking at this point, not sure if I should hide or run or confront them, but I opt to hide. I go to the downstairs bathroom, then I hide myself away in a hamper that's built in, something that looks like it wouldn't be able to fit a person. I can see out through the door as well, but I'm ready to close it in case they come inside. Upstairs, I begin to hear one of them banging on the front door hard. It sounds like they're using a crowbar or a baseball bat. The other one I hear walking around the other side of the house, knocking over some lumber we had leaned against the house, and nearly giving me a heart attack. The guy at the door starts walking around the house now, having broken the door down. He's shining a flashlight inside all the rooms. Luckily, the bathroom window was fogged, so I wasn't visible as long as he didn't break it. I can hear them talking to each other heatedly for a few minutes, but I can't really make out what they're saying. Silence ensues until one of them, with a bat or pipe or crowbar, begins to swing at the flower pots and furniture on the porch. I seriously begin to worry about their intentions now. Just then, I hear a second car coming up the driveway. This scares me even more. I'm thinking of all the bad things that could happen with two cars of these psychos, until I see the spotlight. It was the cop. I immediately hear the two men bolt out of the house and into the woods. The cop starts chasing one of them, but they had a head start and were well off into the forest. I hesitantly emerge from the basement and I begin to walk upstairs just as a second cop car arrives, lights flashing. I walk outside and I walk up to the second officer, barely able to speak after what had just happened. The first officer is back now and is looking in the truck they abandoned. We walk over and I can see a Bowie knife lying on the seat. I was surprised to see the truck was nice and relatively new and still had paper plates. The cops ran the plates and they turned out to be fake. They told me later the truck had been stolen. There was paraphernalia in the glove box as well, for certain crystal substances. They had also slashed 4 of the tires on my car. I called my grandparents, waking them up, and they were as scared as I was. One of the officers waited for a tow truck to come and pick up the abandoned pickup, and offered to stay at the house a while longer. I called one of my friends, the one that had offered to let me crash at their place, and he came and picked me up. I was still shaken. I didn't sleep at all that night. The next day, I went back, not alone of course, and I had my car towed into town. It didn't look like anything else had been messed with, although the cops hadn't caught the guys yet. My grandparents came home the next day, cutting their trip short. My grandpa soon thereafter bought a rifle. They then had an alarm installed and slept with floodlights on almost every night after that. There was never another sign of these guys, but I opted to couch surf in town until school started again. I never could bring myself to go back out there and live with them. One of the guys was later arrested that year, after the dealership the truck was stolen from hired a private detective. Apparently, there had been many similar thefts in Ohio and Indiana, but the charges against him for what he did to me were dropped in a plea deal. I don't think the other guy was ever caught. The saddest part for me is that it ruined my ability to enjoy the country. My grandparents' house was one of my favorite places growing up, and now I no longer feel safe there. I guess I'll take the petty crime of the city over the isolation of the countryside. The One Who Reaps, from R.M. Location unknown. Growing up, my brother and I attended a prestigious private school in our country. My family was pretty well off, my father being a prominent criminal lawyer and our mother a physician. When I was 16, my brother was in his final year of secondary school. He was on the fast track for the Dukes and had just been named head boy. Sometime in March, my brother attended a party in which a girl from my year was attending. From what I would later hear, they both hit it off, and soon they went upstairs to the host's parents' room. 2 weeks after the party, the very same girl filed a police report, and alleged to school officials that my brother had assaulted her after she refused his advances. At the time, our father was an up-and-coming figure in criminal law, and the school was his main financial beneficiary. The girl was suspended for casting aspersions, and my brother was arrested the same day. My brother was charged with the assault. During the trial, my father defended my brother, and my parents never left his side. They remained firmly confident in his acquittal. I remember the malignant smirk my father and mother made every time the girl's family burst into tears and their legal team fell apart. When my brother was finally acquitted, he turned and faced the girl, and he blew her a kiss. My mother and father were ecstatic about my brother's exoneration, his life returning to normal almost instantly. My brother would then go off to university to study medicine, and I returned to school. Every time the girl saw me, though, she would begin to cry. I would tell my mother about this, and she would just joke that that's the price you pay for trying to ruin her child. But at my graduation, my brother attended the whole time. He would not stop staring at the girl. It was the kind of stare that a predator makes before it comes for its prey. It has been 15 years, and my brother is now a prominent neurosurgeon. I asked my parents about this event. My mother actually admitted it to me. She told me that my brother straight up told her, confessed, that he did in fact hurt that girl at the party that night. Both my parents knew that they would need to make this go away so that my brother's future was secure. This girl, she took her own life 2 years ago after some kids spray painted some very mean words about her over her house. My brother and parents laugh about this saga as if it was some sort of game that they won. My sister's apartment. From Peter A. Location: St. Louis, Missouri. Back in 2014, my sister was accepted into medical school. She moved into a very cheap apartment, as it was all she could afford given the university's high tuition fees and expenses. The buildings in the apartment complex were very old and run down. The complex itself was in a very unsafe part of the city, and the surrounding area was quite eerie and desolate. She told my parents that she felt very uncomfortable in her apartment, and she would often feel as though she was being watched. My parents brushed her concerns off as nothing more than minor adjustment difficulties. After all, it was her first time living alone and being far away from home. As months passed, my sister's fears worsened, and she told my parents that she was having trouble sleeping, as strange noises from outside her window would wake her up in the middle of the night. She was too terrified to investigate these noises, and instead kept her curtains closed and hid under the covers. Then she would eventually go back to sleep. My parents became increasingly concerned for her well-being, so they asked me to fly out to St. Louis to keep her company for a few days. Spring break had just begun, and I had plenty of time to lose, so I didn't mind. She let me crash on her couch for the week. At first, I didn't notice anything unusual or strange about the apartment. Sure, it wasn't the nicest place, but there wasn't anything particularly frightening about it. But one night, she woke me up and told me that she was hearing noises from outside her bedroom window again. I was still half asleep, but I told her I would check it out for her. When I got to her room, I heard what sounded like footsteps and tree branches hitting the window. I quickly opened the curtains and peered outside. I couldn't see anything because it was so dark. My iPhone had a flashlight app, so I opened the window and held my phone outside. I slowly moved it back and forth, but I froze upon seeing a man staring right back at me. His face was pale. He was wearing a hooded jacket. He stood there smiling feverishly at me. I heard a scream from behind me, and I almost dropped my phone. I turned around and looked at my sister. She was petrified. When I looked back outside, the guy had vanished. I called the police and reported the incident. They searched the premises, but found no sign of the man. The officers told us that the man we had seen actually matched the description of a suspect that was wanted for questioning in the disappearance and passing of 2 females from St. Louis, but they had never been able to get in contact with them. Of course, my sister was more scared than ever, so we both boarded the next plane and went home that night. My sister was too traumatized to return back to school, let alone the apartment. She decided instead to take some time off of school and stay home for a while, before eventually resuming her studies at a medical school closer to home. I'm glad that she's safe now, far away from that man. It still bothers me that he was never found, and I don't even want to imagine what would have happened if my sister stayed in that apartment all by herself. My Scary True Drunk Story. From Matt H. Location: unknown. My name is Matt, and this story involves an incident with a friend who was involved, who was named Matt as well, so I'll call him Matthew to avoid any confusion. Anyway, I go to a community college, and Matthew goes to a local university. Matthew comes back to his house near where I live about every other weekend or so. Due to these circumstances, there aren't many opportunities to go out and party, so we decided to hang out on that Saturday night instead. After driving around a bit, we got to my house at around 7 p.m. I told Matthew that we could get hammered once my mom left the house, as she's the only person that lives with me. She left the house around an hour later to do her thing, so we were going to do ours. As soon as she was gone, we broke out the beer, rum, and whiskey, you name it. After a round of drinks, we went down to the basement to play some video games, like we've been doing before. Only about an hour after that, I got an idea to play some basketball at the local park. It was dark out now, but the courts of the park had lights, so it'd be fine. The idea seemed brilliant at the time, but it was far from it. You see, Matthew didn't have his license, so I had to pick him up earlier, meaning that we only had my car to drive. We still thought it would work out though, because believe it or not, he was still good to drive. But let me say here that you should never drive if you've had even a drop of alcohol. Anyway, the park was literally 2 minutes away from my house, so we set out for our short drive, and shortly after we arrive. Matthew and I noticed from the parking lot that the court was empty and the lights were on. No big deal. We did see a couple of other cars parking there. We figured that there were some kids in the woods hanging out. We got out and began to play some basketball for a bit. But not even 10 minutes after that, the lights just shut off. It turns out we forgot to push the buttons for the lights, so it wasn't a big deal. The lights here turn off every hour unless you push the buttons to reset the cycle. We pushed the buttons, but the lights would take about 10 to 15 minutes to warm up again, even though they were just powered off. So we messed around for a bit on the court before walking to my car to wait for the lights to come on. After about 10 minutes of waiting, the lights finally came on. I was the first one to get out of the car. My door wasn't even shut when I turned around and saw 5 people running full speed at me. I screamed back at Matthew, "Get back in the car!" He was just getting out and was confused, but I said it again. He listened and I tried to start the car. Then we sped out of there. By then, those 5 kids, I think, had already surrounded the car. We simply had to get out of there alive, so we sped past them and narrowly missed the 2 kids in front of the car. We began to drive to the town nearby rather than my house, because I didn't feel safe knowing that those kids were within walking distance from my place. We both sobered up at this point, him more than me, so driving 5 minutes to town would not be an issue anymore. Those insane kids did not follow us during the ride. We got to town, got some snacks at the gas station, then finally decided to head back to my house. We hardly spoke about the incident until we got back, simply because we were shaken. Once inside my house with all the doors and windows locked, Matthew proceeded to tell me that he saw knives in each of the hands of the 5 kids. Personally, I hadn't seen them, but I believed Matthew. We both had a hard time sleeping that night due to the thought of those kids finding us somehow. Those little psychos, they definitely had a plan to hurt, rob, or even end the 2 of us. I'm glad we didn't find out what exactly they had in store. To this day, I don't go back to that park, which is a shame because I grew up playing there. So much for that. To anyone attending college or anyone who has graduated, I'm sure you're all aware of the pains and hardships of attending school like that. No worries, I believe in you. I know you'll make it through. But sometimes things scarier than last-minute studying happen to college students. So if I were you, I'd stick with your friends, stay indoors whenever possible, and sleep with a big old bottle of pepper spray as a surprise gift for the creepers and weirdos who stare at you from your bedroom window. Good night. If you enjoyed this episode of Darkness Prevails, be sure to leave a like, share it with your friends, leave me a comment, and subscribe. If you have a story you want featured on this show, share it with us at darknessprevails.org/submit. If you want to support the show, you can do so by donating to us at patreon.com/darknessprevails. Our patrons unlock access to ad-free MP3 downloads of our episodes, and they get their names in the credits at the end of our videos on YouTube. We also have merchandise, which you can get by clicking the shop button below if you're on YouTube, or just go to teespring.com/stores/darknessprevails. Now then, here are my 5 favorite early comments from the previous video about 10 real glitches in reality. Kane7ify says, red or blue pill? And the Game Mate guy replies, Prozac. I don't think I have anything to say to that. A perfect reply. Stranger Story says, love these glitches in reality. I have seen and experienced one myself. I saw a plane simply stop in the sky and didn't move. I looked away and looked back again, and it was suddenly moving once more. That would be really jarring. I would personally love to experience a glitch. They sound safe-ish and curious. Shivanath1S says, is Neo in these stories? There's no Neo, but there is an especially haunted elevator that should make you mess your pants all the same. Shania Unger says, yes, thank you. Had such a bad day and seeing this made it 10 times better. One for every story, right? It's great how scary stories can make your day somehow brighter. And B. Washington says, so happy to see a video from Darkness Prevails. Kids are driving me crazy, and I'm in a very dark place right now. Your videos make my day. Well, as I've always said and believe, if there's something that brings brightness to your day, surround yourself with it whenever you're feeling down. I'm glad you enjoy my videos, but whether it's me or another narrator or something else, as long as it makes you happy and makes you feel better, search it out and let your problems dissolve. Well, that brings us to the end of this episode. But don't you worry too much, because more scary stories are coming soon. So stay tuned. Until next time, here are the credits to my amazing patrons. Remember, stay safe out there and stay creepy, because this world is a strange one.